Joseph Stalin, 1878 to 1953, was a Georgian revolutionary who ruled the Soviet Union from the mid-1920s until his death, serving as General Secretary 1922 to 1952 and Premier 1941 to 1953. Rising from poverty, he joined Lenin's Bolsheviks, edited Pravda, and endured arrests and exiles before gaining power after the 1917 revolution and Lenin's death in 1924. Stalin consolidated authority through socialism in one country, 5-year plans of collectivization and industrialization, and the Great Purge, 1934 to 1939, which saw mass imprisonments and executions. He signed a 1939 pact with Nazi Germany, but after Hitler's invasion, the Red Army repelled the Nazis and captured Berlin in 1945, making the USSR a superpower. Stalin expanded Soviet influence across Eastern Europe, oversaw nuclear weapons development 1949, and led during the Cold War's onset. His rule brought famines, repression, and anti-Semitic campaigns. Yet, he was revered in a personality cult and remains controversial, celebrated as a wartime leader but condemned for mass atrocities. Mao Zedong, 1893 to 1976, known as Chairman Mao, was the founding father of the People's Republic of China, ruling as head of the Communist Party from 1949 until his death. Born in Hunan to a peasant family, he embraced nationalism, anti-imperialism, and later Marxism-Leninism, becoming a CPC founder and leader during the Long March and Chinese Civil War. After defeating the nationalists in 1949, Mao established a one-party state, consolidating power through land reforms, campaigns against counter-revolutionaries, and a psychological victory in the Korean War. His Great Leap Forward, 1958 to 62, caused the deadliest famine in history, while the Cultural Revolution, 1966 to 76, brought violent class struggle, cultural destruction, and an extreme cult of personality. Mao also opened China diplomatically, notably meeting U.S. President Nixon in 1972. Supporters credit him with ending imperialism, modernizing China, improving education, health and women's status, and overseeing population growth from 550 to 900 million. Critics condemn his autocratic rule, mass repression, and policies that caused 30 to 70 million deaths. Benito Mussolini, 1883 to 1945, founder of fascism, ruled Italy as prime minister from 1922 to 1943 and as dictator until his execution in 1945. Originally a socialist journalist, he was expelled from the PSY for supporting WWI, later embracing nationalism and creating the fascist movement. After the March on Rome, 1922, he became Italy's youngest prime minister, soon establishing a one-party dictatorship with secret police and suppression of opposition. He signed the Lateran Treaty, 1929, with the Vatican and pursued aggressive expansion. Libya, Ethiopia, 1936, Albania, 1939, and intervention in the Spanish Civil War. Aligning with Hitler, Mussolini joined the Axis powers, entering World War II in 1940. Italian campaigns in Africa, Greece, and Russia ended in disaster, leading to his ousting in 1943. Rescued by Germany, he headed the puppet Italian Social Republic until captured and executed by partisans in April 1945. Pol Pot, 1925 to 1998, born Saloth Sar, was a Cambodian Marxist-Leninist and Khmer nationalist who led the Khmer Rouge, 1963 to 1997, and ruled as Prime Minister of Democratic Kampuchea, 1976 to 1979. Educated in Cambodia and Paris, he embraced communism, influenced by Stalin and Mao. After years of underground activity, his forces seized power in 1975, establishing a one-party agrarian socialist state. Urban populations were forcibly relocated to collective farms, and mass executions, starvation, and disease caused the Cambodian genocide, killing 1.5 to 2 million people, about a quarter of the population. In 1978, after Pol Pot's attacks on Vietnamese villages, Vietnam invaded and toppled his regime in 1979, installing a rival government. Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge retreated to the Thai border, remaining active until the 1990s. Arrested by his own faction, he died in 1998 under disputed circumstances. Supporters saw him as a defender of Cambodian sovereignty with Chinese backing. Omar al-Bashir, but globally, he is condemned as a totalitarian dictator from 1989 to 2019 after seizing power in a military coup. Founder of the National Congress Party, he won multiple disputed elections. His government ended the Second Sudanese Civil War in 2005, leading to South Sudan's independence, but his rule was dominated by the Darfur conflict, where hundreds of thousands died. Saddam Hussein, 1937 to 2006, was president of Iraq from 1979 to 2003 and a leading figure of the Ba'ath Party, which combined Arab nationalism and socialism. He rose to power after the 1968 coup, consolidating control through security forces and filling key posts with Sunni Arabs. In the 1970s, he nationalized oil, fueling rapid economic growth, but later wars and sanctions devastated Iraq. Saddam's rule was marked by repression of Shia and Kurdish uprisings, mass purges, and genocides that killed an estimated 250,000 Iraqis. He launched the Iran-Iraq War, 1980 to 1988, and invaded Kuwait, 1990, triggering the Gulf War. Widely condemned for brutality, yet admired by some in the Arab world for defying the US and Israel, he earned the title Butcher of Baghdad. In 2003, a US-led coalition invaded Iraq, toppling his regime. Captured in December 2003, Saddam was tried for crimes against humanity, convicted for the 1982 killing of 148 Shia, and executed by hanging on 30 December 2006. Manuel Noriega, 1934 to 2017, was a Panamanian military officer and de facto ruler of Panama, 1983 to 1989. Rising through the army under Omar Torrijos, he became chief of intelligence and later consolidated power after Torrijos' death. Though a valued CIA asset and conduit for U.S. operations in Latin America, he also enriched himself through drug trafficking. Indicted in 1988 for racketeering and smuggling, he was ousted by the 1989 U.S. invasion, tried in Miami, and sentenced to 40 years, serving 17. Later, extradited to France, 2010, and then Panama, 2011, he faced further prison terms. His rule, marked by media repression, military expansion, and persecution of opponents, was widely described as a dictatorship. He died in 2017 after brain surgery complications, remembered as both a U.S. ally and nemesis, and compared to rulers like Gaddafi and Pinochet. Muammar Gaddafi, 1942 to 2011, ruled Libya for 42 years after seizing power in a 1969 coup. Initially seen as a revolutionary hero, he consolidated control through his Green Book doctrine, oil revenues, and harsh security measures, with his family dominating politics. His support for terrorism led to U.S. airstrikes in 1986 and sanctions over the Pan Am Flight 103 bombing. Though his pariah status later eased, the 2011 Arab Spring sparked a rebellion that toppled his regime. Captured while fleeing Sirte, Gaddafi was killed under unclear circumstances. Victoriano Huerta, 1850 to 1916, was a Mexican military officer and the 39th president, rising during the Mexican Revolution. Trained at the military academy, he served under Porfirio Diaz and gained a reputation for harsh campaigns against indigenous groups. Initially loyal to President Francisco I Madero, staged the 1913 coup known as the 10 Tragic Days, leading to Madero's assassination and Huerta's presidency. His rule faced U.S. opposition under Woodrow Wilson and constant revolutionary uprisings, forcing his resignation in July 1914. Exiled and later detained in the U.S., he died in 1916 amid allegations of involvement in German wartime plots. Miguel Primo de Rivera, 1870 to 1930, a Spanish general, ruled as dictator and prime minister from 1923 to 1930 after seizing power in a coup that dissolved parliament and suspended the constitution. Promising a temporary regime to end corruption, he instead imposed authoritarian rule, pursuing paternalistic reforms and major infrastructure projects that briefly boosted the economy. He repressed separatist movements in Catalonia and the Basque Country and aligned Spain with Mussolini's Italy. Economic decline and the Great Depression eroded support, leading to his resignation in 1930 and exile in Paris, where he died months later. His fall opened the path to the Second Spanish Republic and, eventually, the Civil War. His son, José Antonio, later founded the fascist Falange Española, influential in Spanish politics. Kim Jong-un, born 1983/84, has been Supreme Leader of North Korea since 2011 and Chairman of the Workers' Party since 2012, succeeding his father, Kim Jong-il, and continuing the dynasty founded by his grandfather, Kim Il-sung. The first leader born after North Korea's founding, he consolidated power with multiple top titles and was promoted to Marshal in 2012. Known for purges, including the execution of his uncle, 2013, and the alleged assassination of his half-brother, 2017, Kim has also engaged in high-profile diplomacy. He met South Korean President Moon Jae-in in 2018 to 2019, held historic summits with U.S. President Donald Trump in Singapore, 2018, and Hanoi, 2019, and later met Russian President Vladimir Putin. Despite these talks, his rule remains defined by authoritarian control and the unresolved nuclear issue. Ferdinand Marcos is remembered for running a corrupt and undemocratic government as the 10th president of the Philippines, 1965 to 1986. Marcos came to power in 1965 and was elected to a second term in 1969. However, in the face of public unrest, the imposed martial law was imposed 1972 to 1981. In 1983, his longtime political opponent, Ninoy Aquino, was assassinated and Marcos's government implicated. The country ignites in protests. This eventually led to a snap election in 1986, with Marcos running against Corazon Aquino. The election is marred by widespread reports of violence and tampering with election results. The so-called People's Power Revolution gained strength, eventually forcing Marcos and his government to capitulate. Marcos is forced to flee to Hawaii, where he dies in 1989. In the 2004 Global Transparency Report, Marcos appeared in the list of the world's most corrupt leaders. He was said to have amassed between $5 billion and $10 billion in his 21 years as president. His equally famous wife, Imelda Marcos, later returned to the Philippines and to politics. Jorge Rafael Videla was president of Argentina at the head of a military junta that overthrew Isabel Perón's government in 1976. The junta that controlled the country until 1983 was initially made up of three men: Videla, General Orlando Ramon Agosti, and Admiral Eduardo Emilio Macera. Videla and the junta waged a brutal campaign against left-leaning opposition, the so-called Dirty War, arresting thousands of people during their time in power who either disappeared, were murdered, tortured, or imprisoned. Estimates of those who disappeared vary greatly but are often thought to be around 30,000 people. Videla and the junta tried to bring in a freer market economy, but were only partly successful, and the country was near economic collapse by the early 1980s. Videla resigned in 1981, and civilian elections were brought back in 1983. Videla was initially sentenced for murder in 1985 and was then pardoned in 1987-1990. More charges were laid, including the kidnapping of babies born to political prisoners, for which he was sentenced to 50 years in 2012. He died in prison in 2013, serving a life sentence.